Continuing on with this episode of Coastin with Piv and Finer, we are joined by the play-by-play voice of the New York Islanders on MSG Networks. You might have heard him on NBC Sports as well, and also calling the PLL, the Premier Lacrosse League. And he's a former ECHL broadcaster. See, we sometimes guys in the ECHL make it, and he's a very good success story. It's Brendan Burke. Brendan, thanks for joining us here on this episode of Coastin.
Thanks for having me on. Yeah, proud Wheeling Naylor alum.
Well, we'll dive right into it, I guess. One of the things, obviously, the first question comes to mind. You spent 2 years in the ECHL. What are some of your favorite memories of working in Wheeling and spending time in the Premier AA Hockey League?
It was a great spot for me. I was really fortunate to be able to basically come out of college and join the Nailers. And so I was 22 years old and didn't really know what I was doing. But they gave me the platform to figure it out. And I guess I did. But, I just look back, and it was really my first real job. Forget about broadcasting. It was my first real job. It was the first time in my life I'd ever called men's hockey. I only called women's hockey in college. So there was a lot of things that I was able to grow with in that league, and specifically in Wheeling. I think back and kind of question how I did it, because I didn't know what I was doing. But at the same time, I learned there to treat my broadcast the same way I treat it now. Treat it as if it's an NHL broadcast and then everybody in the world is watching or listening to it. And that was my mentality back then. And it kind of helped me along the way. So I've had a few stops along the way to get to where I am now, but you never forget your first. And that was the Wheeling Nailers in the ECHL for me.
It might be somewhat of an inflection point to say that the time that you were in Wheeling could still be described a little bit as the old school ECHL and the old school version of hockey. As your first hockey job, what were you thinking when you were hearing some of the stories that were going on and traveling on the bus and hearing the old war stories back at West Banco Arena?
You know what the funny thing is that so my first season, I was there 2 years. My first season was 2006, 2007. And it was the first year where you guys are probably even too young to remember this, but it was the first year of what do they call it? It was the standard of enforcement, something where they didn't change any rules. They just changed what the rules that they were going to call. So all of the hooks, the holds, the interferences, all of those things, they were enforcing things that had never been enforced before. And so the referees were looking for everything and the players were just doing their normal stuff. The first game I ever did was a road game in Charlotte at Bobcats Arena. I think it was Time Warner Cable Arena, but back when they played, when Charlotte was in the ECHL and when Charlotte was in the ECHL and didn't play where they currently play at Bojangles. But the first game I ever did, the Nailers lost 10-3. They gave up 8 power play goals because it was just everything was a penalty. Everything was a penalty in the first game. I'm like, what is going on here? But they gave up 8 power play goals in one game. They lost 10-3. There was a goalie fight. A guy got his head smashed on the ice. Like, it was just, I was like, where am I? What is this? And first of all, so I'm in an NBA arena as my first game. And I got hired really late towards the beginning of the season. I had not even been in West Banco Arena at this point. So I think I've made it, right? Like, I'm in the ECHL, these beautiful buildings, like, this is awesome. And then I proceeded to do the rest of the schedule and realized that not every building was an NBA building that I was going to be working in. But yeah, that was the way it started, was with just I guess the beginning of the end of that era, right? It was phasing some of that stuff out of the game. And so along with it, I remember, and since we're telling stories, there was a guy on our team, my first year, named Matt Goody. I don't know why I remember that name. He didn't play very much. But he was the old school guy where he couldn't play hockey. He really wasn't a very good hockey player, but he was tough. And I mean, he did not wear shoulder pads. He had the caps of the shoulder pads were sewn to the suspenders that he wore under his jersey because he didn't want the restricted movement in a fight. I mean, he really wasn't a hockey player, but those guys were still a part of the game at that point. And I think that season was when they realized that this isn't happening anymore and that we're moving forward towards a better brand of hockey.
So you started, game one is here in terms of excitement and just complete nonsense happening on the ice. And then you kind of grow in with the rest of the ECHL and how it kind of morphs to being what it is now. For your next few games after that, and you finally settle into Wheeling. How quickly did it take for you to get really adjusted to the job? Since, you mentioned it, you just called women's hockey coming into that.
Yeah. The biggest adjustment for me was kind of life on my own, right? I had been in college, and I didn't go to school. I went to college, which was about 3.5 hours away from where I grew up. So I was on my own in college, but kind of being on your own, having a job. The one thing was, so I mean, again, this is the ECHL, and this was I was 22 years old. I got hired late. They treated me like a player, kind of. So they provided housing for me. So I lived, if you guys have ever been to Wheeling, you may have stayed at the McClure Hotel or the Ramada or whatever it is now. I lived there for my entire first year. All the way in the back, there's like a sketchy staircase that goes up to apartments that have like kitchens in them and stuff. And I lived in that apartment with a great view of the parking garage for an entire year. And so like it was an adjustment for me to do that. But the one thing that I had going for me was that I was driven to succeed. And I knew how fortunate I was to have a job in the ECHL and doing professional hockey. And so that is all I did. I mean, I worked in the office from 9 to 5. And then I walked across the street, picked up some food on the way, and I worked on my broadcast stuff until I went to bed. I watched Penguins games while they were on TV. I mean, it's literally I ate, slept, and breathed hockey. And that was how I approached the job. It was, hey, I love this job. It's great. It's a great spot for me. I'm trying to progress my career. I've got nothing else to do. My girlfriend lives a million miles away, my wife now, but I didn't have anything else. So I poured myself into the job and worked as hard as I could on getting better at it.
As a play-by-play broadcaster, Evan and I like to think about it of sort of the where you started a season and then where you end a season in terms of your progression. What tangible things do you remember about, I won't just say year by year, but the start of your time in Wheeling, having never called a men's pro hockey game, to the end when you eventually moved on to the American Hockey League in Peoria?
Yeah, I remember, at least from the other side of the job, aside from broadcasting, obviously being in charge of media relations and all that other stuff, I remember showing up at my first home game and somebody asked me for the bios of the players, and I'm like, what bios? I had to make them. I didn't realize that, didn't know that. So you learn things like that along the way where you're like, oh man, I'm sorry. I really didn't know. I will work on them. Next time you come, I'll have them for you, type of thing. But you just, you get to a point where I think early on I had the mentality of, listen, I'm a big deal, right? Like I'm going to be in the NHL tomorrow. I should be doing national games type of mentality. And I think everybody that is in this business has some part of that in their brain, right? Because if you don't have that, you don't have the confidence to succeed. It's part of that. But you always think you're going to be the Adam Amin, the Joe Davis, the guys that just 26 years old, they're on national television doing NFL games. You're like, damn, like you always think that's going to happen to you. And it doesn't happen to a lot of people. But you got to, I remember probably my biggest progression was I thought I was on ESPN. I thought I was on Fox, on NBC, and I called games that way. And as you guys know, ECHL fans don't want to hear it down the middle. They don't, right? You're in a small market. Your audience is diehard fans. If they're listening to an ECHL game on the radio, they're a diehard fan, right? Let's be honest. So they don't want to hear you as excited for an opposing team goal as for a home team goal. They want to hear a difference. And for me, I'm like, no, that's not me. Like I'm a down the middle guy. But you realize, or I realized, I don't want to lump anybody else into this, but I realized that you have to know your audience. And there's something to that. And just because I'm not playing it down the middle doesn't mean I'm not a good broadcaster. It just means that I'm realizing that I have to adapt to where I am and what people want to hear. And so I tried through kicking and screaming and people repeatedly telling me that I'm getting too excited for other teams' goals and blah, blah, blah. I realized that maybe I'm wrong. I always thought I was right, but you know what? Maybe I'm wrong. And so I think that my biggest progression really in that first year was finding that balance between where I felt comfortable as a broadcaster and where the fans felt comfortable listening to my broadcast. Because, at the end of the day, you don't need a degree in broadcast journalism to determine if you like a broadcaster or not, or if they're a good broadcaster or not. You just need to listen to them. And if you like them, you like them. And if you don't, you don't. And when you're judged on performance that way, sometimes the customer's right. Sometimes you're wrong. And I realized that during that first season. And I think that kind of mind frame shift for me helped me progress to that next level and realize that there was there was more to broadcasting than what I thought there was. And I was learning from the people that were listening to me.
And I think that's a very important fork in the road that a lot of broadcasters come to, where it's, you have to adapt to be successful, or, if you continue in your own ways and stay down that path where you're not willing to change, what you grew up doing. I think a lot of times that steers you down the wrong path, and you chose obviously the right one. And then, your time in Wheeling comes to an end because you get a promotion to the AHL. How did that all come about?
Yeah. I got jobs really late in the process, really everywhere I've gone. And like I said, Wheeling was no exception. I got hired in Wheeling, not to go backwards, but in Wheeling, I got hired like 2 weeks before the season started. And the day I was leaving for Europe to see my sister because I didn't have a job. And all of a sudden I had a job, and I'm like, do you guys want me to cancel my trip? I've got a flight at 6 o'clock. And they're like, when do you come back? And it was like 3 days before opening night. And I was like, I can cancel it. They're like, how long will it take you to get here once you come back? I'm like, I'll be there the next day. They're like, have fun. So that's why I said I hadn't even gone to West Banco Arena when I did my first game, because I was literally, my head was spinning. I didn't even know where it was. But so it's kind of a similar thing with where it happened in Peoria. Their broadcaster, Tom Callahan, got hired by the Nashville Predators very late. And so it was, that trickle-down effect where they couldn't fill the job until it was open, and it wasn't open until late, and so they had to scramble type of thing. But during my second season in Wheeling, I had been selected to call the All-Star game, and at the end of the year, I was awarded Broadcaster of the Year. So I think having those things on my resume and a little bit of notoriety kind of gave me a step up in applying for jobs against other potential ECHL candidates. And so, it happened late, and I wound up getting hired again. Talk about late in the process. I showed up in Wheeling, having already interviewed for the job in Peoria and hoping I was going to get it. But I showed up in Wheeling for training camp. I was doing baseball during the summer, so I wasn't living there full time. And I literally showed up for training camp on whatever day it was, did not take anything out of my car. The next day I got the call that I got hired in Peoria. I just kept driving west. And showed up in Peoria where their training camp was already going on as well. So it was kind of a whirlwind experience, and I want to spend the next 5 years there.
Talk about the resilience. Everybody can view this in different ways, but being an ECHL or an AHL broadcaster is very fun when you're on the air, but certainly that there's a lack of glamour pulling into downtown Reading to unload a bus at 3 a.m, as you know, and as Evan knows many times. What resilience did you find in yourself to be able to, throughout your years in the minors, continue to grind and want to go through it?
Yeah, I think part of that is that confidence that I always believed that I would make it here. And just not knowing when, not knowing how long. There's the stubbornness of, I lived in Peoria for 5 years. I didn't put a single picture on a wall. I just always thought I was leaving. Like, I just always felt like I'm one step away. But that's a terrible way to live. And you have to enjoy and embrace where you are. And I think I wound up getting married my 4th year in Peoria. My wife moved out, and we had an apartment, and it kind of felt a little bit more like living. And I think that was a big change for me, where it was, okay, you're going to get there, but enjoy the time that it takes to get there. Enjoy the journey a little bit more. And so I did. And I worked with some really great people, really in all my stops. I mean, I still see the Brooks brothers every once in a while around the NHL circle or at AHL All-Star games. And they were the owners in Wheeling that gave me my first job. I worked with Jared Bednar in Peoria, and I still see him when we do Avalanche games. And I still see, Travis Green when we go to Vancouver, I worked with for 3 years when I was in Utica. And so I still see these guys, and even the players, the Ian Coles and the Ryan Reeves and the Jake Allens and the guys that I worked with really closely in the American Hockey League level, even Paul Bissonnette, who I had in Wheeling, right? Like, I see him doing Coyotes games. Like, there's a special connection there when you see some of those guys, because you went through it together. And yeah, part of it is unloading buses at weird times of night in sketchy cities. And, part of it is the fun when the light goes on and it's 7 o'clock and you're doing your thing. But it's all part of getting to where you want to go. And the sooner you can embrace the other parts of it, the better off you're going to be, probably just emotionally and mentally, maybe not so in progressing your career, but just in being a better person in general.
So Peoria's, time in Peoria comes to an end because of league changes there. And then did that kind of leave you in a little bit of a limbo saying, okay, well, I lost my job because of something that I didn't do or I didn't have anything to do with. It wasn't my fault. And then you get picked up right away going to Utica. Was there any sort of maybe doubt or, just anything that really hurt your confidence at that time?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, so I had been in Peoria for 5 years. So I was 7 years into pro hockey, and all of a sudden I was on unemployment. I was out of a job. I mean, people see, oh, Peoria sold to Vancouver. Vancouver put it in Utica. You just went with the team. That's really not how it happened. I was flat out of a job, kind of blindsided. We found out it was handled really poorly by the St. Louis Blues. But I mean, we found out that we were losing our team on the local news. I mean, it was not a good feeling. So here I am 7 years into my pro career, thinking I'm kind of spinning my tires a little bit. And I didn't know what to do. I didn't know what my next step was. Was it to try and, stay in the AHL and wherever, Peoria's franchise went, try and hook on there? Was it to try and freelance TV? Was it to do something different? Was it to try a different sport? Was 5 years in the American Hockey League enough? Did I need a sixth or a seventh? Or did I bank enough that I could go do something else and still be a credible candidate for an NHL job? And so I was kind of toying with a lot of different things and talking to my agent and working through some options. And two of them presented themselves. One was Utica, which was the AHL franchise all of a sudden becoming the Utica Comets. And the other one was college football for Fox Sports. And they wound up coming at the same time. And I wound up being able to finagle doing both. And so because of me losing my job, it made me kind of pursue other things. And it wound up leading to what is the greatest thing that happened to me was television, because I needed that television experience to get where I am right now. So I didn't necessarily want to go back to the AHL, but Utica is, strangely enough, where my wife grew up. She grew up right outside of Utica in Herkimer, New York. And it just felt like we were at that point where we were going to start a family, and her parents still lived there. And it was too hard to deny the fact that this looked like a really good spot for me personally. But at the same time, I didn't want to give up the football, and the guys in Utica were nice enough to work with me on being able to do that. So I missed some Friday and Saturday games early on in the season to go do college football. And I wound up, doing both those things and growing my career in two very different ways at the exact same time. So one of the best things that happened to me was losing that job in Peoria, even though it didn't feel like it at the time.
AHL travel from Utica still the easiest travel that you may have ever had throughout your career?
So the funny thing is that the first year that we were in Utica, they had moved the franchise from Peoria, and they didn't really want to go through realignment. So they kept us in the Western Conference.
Right. That's right.
So we were still flying back and playing Chicago and Milwaukee and Rockford, and we were going out to Abbotsford. And so we made 3 trips to Abbotsford. I mean, one was because we were still in the Western Conference. The other was because we were Vancouver's affiliate and we were the only way they sell tickets there. But we made 3 different trips from Utica, New York, which is an hour bus ride to Syracuse, a flight to either Chicago or Toronto, then a flight to Vancouver, and then an hour and a half bus ride to Abbotsford. We did it 3 times. So yes, because there were nights where, we were in Peoria. We lost Quad City my first year, which was just an hour away from Peoria, which was awesome. They folded after the first year, relocated. So it was our closest opponent was 3 hours away. So you're getting home at 2 a.m. no matter what. But being in Utica and playing in Syracuse 45 minutes down the road and being home at 11 o'clock at night, it was a dream. I was like, this is awesome. Why does anybody go to the West? The East is unbelievable. If you were in Hartford or Providence or one of those teams where you're home every night, this is awesome. So yeah, there were certainly some good parts to it, but that first year, man, we did a lot of and I was in charge of the travel. I was the travel guy, right? So I had to book all the flights and stuff. It was a lot.
Yeah, I feel that very much booking the travel here in Adirondack. But you do rack up some decent hotel points throughout the time, which are coming pretty handy. So we got to talk to you about the big boy job that you have now, working in the NHL for the New York Islanders. And for people who aren't in the broadcasting world, I mean, jobs like that aren't posted online. It's sort of, you hear rumblings that there's a job opening. Howie Rose leaves the Islanders to focus on the Mets full time. Congrats to him. He had to go through a lot working for both the Mets and Islanders during that time. But when you hear word that Howie Rose leaves, is this you reaching out to your agent, to people you may know, or was this some sort of a thing where they looked at some possible candidates and approached you?
Both, I think, a little bit. I mean, the second that I read, it was, I think, Neil Best of Newsday broke the story that Howie Rose was leaving the Islanders. I mean, I don't even think I read the whole article. I just called my agent. I'm like, hey, like this is the one for me. And the reason I say that is because I grew up in New Jersey, right outside New York City. My dad's a sports writer, works for the New York Post. Like this was a chance for me to get the job that I want in the market that I want. And it just felt like this could be something special. And I had a previous relationship with Howie. My dad covered the Mets when I was in college. And so he knew Howie pretty well. And I had known Howie pretty well. And Howie had always been very helpful to me in applying for other jobs. I mean, Howie Rose had called other NHL teams on my behalf when I was applying for the Florida Panthers job a year earlier, or the Dallas Stars job when they hired Dave Strader, things like that. You know, he was in my corner. And so I'm like, all right, if he's in my corner going to bat for me with the people that he's worked for the last 20 years, that could be amazing. And so I called my agent and then I sent an email to Howie and I just said, hey, you know, congratulations on, you know, your retirement from the Islanders, you know, and just kind of was like, you know, hey, remember me? But his response was, thank you. They're well aware already of who you are. And that was the day after he announced he wasn't coming back. So I think that it was a combination of me obviously pursuing it and from every angle that I had, but also I think Howie had at least let them know that I could be a potential guy if they were looking to go that way. So, and then it came down to what they wanted. If they wanted a guy with NHL experience that had, you know, been around for 20 years, they could have had that. Fortunate for me, they wanted a younger guy that they thought was going to be there for a long time. And they wanted somebody with ties to the New York area. And I was a young guy with ties to the New York area. They wanted a little bit of NHL experience. I had gotten that from filling in with the St. Louis Blues a few years prior to that when Chris Kerber had to leave the team for a little bit. So I had at least a tape of NHL material. And it just kind of all came together with my college football on television, my NHL stuff on radio, my 10 years in the minors. It just kind of all came together. And then I had to go through the process of interviewing. And then I had to audition for it. I had to sit in a studio in Manhattan on July 5th at 9 a.m. and pretend I was doing an Islanders Columbus Blue Jackets game from January and sound good at it. So it's a performance-based industry, right? So you can have everything going your way, and then you get into that chair. And if you can't pull it off on that morning, you don't get much farther than that. So it was a long process. It started in May. It ended the middle of August. And then I had to move in a hurry, and the season started, and it was awesome. But it was there was a lot involved to it. And yeah, no, they didn't post that job on a forum anywhere. So.
How'd you get yourself going that morning for a 9 a.m. making a tape?
So I had to come in from Utica. So I came in the night before, and it was a straight up audition where I came in the night before and they didn't tell me which game it was. They were trying to keep it a secret type of thing. So you're not just rewatching the game over and over again. So they sent me the rosters previously, and I cheated. So I could tell which game it was based on scratches and things like that. So it wasn't really that hard to figure out. So I did a couple of things, being the resourceful guy that I am. One is I downloaded the game notes because I had to log into the NHL site where I could download the game notes from that game and go back and find them. So I prepared for that audition as well as I prepare for any game I've ever done in my life. I mean, I put myself on January 19th, 2016, and just pretended that this was today. And so when they told me which game it was the next morning, I was ready to go. I mean, I had more notes for that than I do for national broadcasts. I mean, I was well prepared. But I made sure that I never watched that game. Right? Like, you don't want to know what's coming. No. You're never going to sound good if you know what's coming, right? So I watched every game the Islanders played against Columbus except for the game that I knew I was going to walk in and do. And then I had to do it with Butch Goring, with my partner. He sat right next to me, and we did an actual broadcast of the game. not all that dissimilar to the way we're calling games right now, which is bananas, in the same studio too. But yeah, I prepared for that game as well as I could, and then had to show that, you had to get along with the analyst. It had to work together. And I wasn't the only guy they brought in. I think they had 5 guys that got down to the audition part of that process. So I know of at least 2 others that are currently NHL broadcasters right now that were involved in that too. So it was not an easy thing to do, and there were plenty of good candidates to do it.
So you walk into the studio that day in July, and then you walk into the studio, this past summer, the same summer, same sort of situation where you're calling games on that giant screen in that studio. What was that experience like? And did it bring you right back to the day you auditioned?
Yeah, I mean, really, it was the only time I'd been in that studio, right? Like, I don't ever really go to MSG Network Studios. I go to the office every once in a while, which is 3 floors above the studio. It's right across from Madison Square Garden, but I don't really go into that studio. So I sat down at that desk and I looked over at Butch and I'm like, I've been here before. It was kind of a weird feeling, but calling games off the monitor, I'd never done it before that audition, and I never did it after the audition until game 1 of the qualifying round, or I guess we did a preseason game in the middle of July. I guess it was July 30th or something, when they got going again. So it was a very strange process. It was a really weird feeling, but I was actually surprised at how quickly we all became comfortable doing it. Certainly it's not ideal and you'd be better off in the arena. But I think that I was surprised at how quickly it felt somewhat normal to just kind of get back into it and forget about everything else and just call the game.
The screen that you called the game on is large, and it almost has a Scott Hansen or Andrew Siciliano red zone like feel on a Sunday afternoon if you're watching the NFL. But this screen is huge. Has the screen always been that huge? How did it get that huge? Did you want it to be that large? What was the process with the screen?
So we were kind of handcuffed as to what we could see. Like people think, I think, regular people hear, oh, you're calling games off a monitor. They think I've got a wall full of monitors. I can look at every angle that I want. I mean, that's not the case. It's basically me sitting next to you on your couch trying to do my job. I don't really have the ability to see much else, besides the fact that you can't look at 2 things at the same time, right? Like, you can give me 10 monitors, but I can only look at 1, and I can't keep bouncing around and trying to find the puck. Like, so, the people at MSG tried to come up with the best way possible for not only me, but for Sam Rosen doing the games for the Rangers. When we did the preseason game, Rangers against Islanders, we were across the hall from each other. Like, I walked in and talked to them and came back into my studio, and it was just a very strange, like, all of their stuff was blue and red. All of our stuff was blue and orange. And it was a pretty cool thing. I wish I had taken a video or something of that, but they just tried to come up with the best way possible. And they thought the best way possible was to give us the biggest monitor possible. And the wall that they normally, display graphics on was capable of handling the video. And so they did that, and they gave that to me. And it was kind of a trial and error type of thing of did this work? Did it not work? Does it work for Butch? We had some secondary monitors. They had like an all 12, what they call it, which is the beauty shot of a blimp basically in the arena, which is actually the same thing as calling a game in Edmonton, which is how high you are there. It's bananas, but so it's pretty useless for the most part. But I asked for an additional monitor for a tight follow, which is the camera right next to the game camera that is just zoomed in more. You see it a lot on replays, but it's a very similar thing to the game camera, except that it gets the puck carrier and the person defending him usually, and that's about it. But I asked for that in a secondary monitor because if I couldn't identify a player from the game camera, which is not always easy to do, I had a better chance of doing it off of that monitor. And so I use that as a safety net where if I couldn't see it, I'd take a quick glance and come back and just use it as just kind of a way to, it's almost like a pair of binoculars where you're just like, okay, perfect. I can see it a little bit better. So I use that. And that helped tremendously in just identifying players. But for the 98% of the game, I was calling it off what you guys were seeing at home.
So now this is what, year 5 coming up for you?
Yeah.
For the Islanders, and that's flown by already, I'm sure, for you. But now you're like a cemented figure on Long Island. You moved the family out there. The team's sticking around in Belmont now. And the biggest thing I think we have to talk about, we haven't even gotten into it yet, so I'm going to bring it up right now, is the sandwich that is named, I believe, after your wife.
My wife, yeah. Thanks for bringing that up.
You didn't even get your own sandwich.
No.
At your local, what is it, around the corner, the Blue Line Deli?
The Blue Line Deli, yeah. The Blue Line Deli here in Huntington, it actually opened during the pandemic. It opened in March or April. And it opened in Huntington, which is where I live here on the island. And I went one day just to support them. They're an Islanders hockey themed deli, which is the coolest thing ever. You walk in there and it's like a sports memorabilia shop, and it's all Islanders stuff. And the owner there, Donnie, is a huge Islanders fan, season ticket holder, all that kind of stuff. And so I went in there to support them early on, when really nobody was going out around here. I just went in with my mask on, grabbed a cup of coffee, and walked out. Just wanted to say hi. And then I kept going back there and trying food and realizing that this was like the best deli I'd ever been to, even if it was a Ranger deli or a New York Knicks deli. Like it's an awesome deli. And my wife has a very in-depth sandwich order at the deli. And it's a lot. And I feel like every time I went there, I'm ordering her sandwich and I'm like reading it off my phone because I couldn't even remember all this stuff. And the guys are just looking at me, and they finally made a joke or they tweeted something to me about the sandwich. And my wife responded, like, you should just put that on the menu because I'm going to order it a lot. And then they actually put it on the menu. And it's called the Berkey. And I don't eat it. It's not even a sandwich that I would eat. It's just, that's her order. And it was just, she had such a high maintenance order that it got added onto the menu. And then it started becoming a thing. They've since added other sandwiches in other people's names. But it started with the Berkey of my wife and her high maintenance sandwich order.
So it's like the Larry David.
Yeah. But I get nothing. Like, I don't even have a salad or any a smoothie or something. I got nothing. So
yeah. Finer, I don't know if you've seen that episode of Curb.
I have, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know if you're a Curb Your Enthusiasm watcher, Brendan.
I haven't seen that one, no.
But there's an episode where Larry David goes to the deli, the local deli in LA, and he sees all the sandwiches named after his friends, and they're all great sandwiches. So he asks for a sandwich named after himself, and he gets it, but it's a sandwich that no one wants. So I forgot what was on it, but exactly. But no one ordered the Larry David, and he was mad about it. So he tried to get, I think, a few guys to try to switch with him, and they wouldn't because they didn't like the sandwich.
Well, so, since the Berkey's creation, there is a Rose Witch, which is in Howie Rose and his daughter Alyssa have their sandwich. There is a Mr. Ledecky, which is the owner of the New York Islanders, so you can get a sandwich there. There's a B Comp, which is named after Brian Compton, who's the NHL.com writer for the Islanders, which is a McRib, by the way. It's pretty good. But yeah, no, the Berkey will, I guess, to Islanders fans, they'll just assume that it's named after me. But in reality, if you go in there's a sign with all the ingredients on it, and it says created by Mrs. Berkey on it.
Yeah. What would be the kinger in case Chris King got a sandwich before you?
That's a good question. I don't know if he has one. But the funny thing is I go in there maybe once a week. I mean, just it's pretty close and it's great food. And one time I went in, and this was in, let's say, June, Chris King was in there. So at one point, randomly, both Islander play-by-play broadcasters were standing in the same deli, which is pretty cool. And somebody said that they'd been to the Blue Line Deli 50 times, and they finally met me. I'm like, the odds of going 50 times to that deli and not meeting me until the 50th time is pretty rare. So, what
is on the Brendan Burke sandwich? If you had to make your own, they say, okay, we gave your wife a sandwich. Yeah. Let's give you one. What would be the
Mr. Berkey?
Yeah.
Mr. Berkey.
I'm not really creative enough. I like to eat other people's sandwiches, really. Like, I don't, but I would probably take the Berkey, which is at its base turkey and provolone, and I'd probably make it roast beef and Swiss, and then I would be okay with it. I think that I'd make that slight change. Everything else would be good. But so hers it's turkey, Swiss, onion, roasted red peppers, mayo, lettuce, oil, and vinegar, I think is all the ingredients. Did I say bacon? And it has to be well done bacon.
Well done bacon.
Yeah.
None of that floppy. You need the crunchy bacon. So in a couple of weeks here, you're going to be back working. So, the NHL starting back up. What are you really excited about? And I'll ask you that question first before a follow-up.
Structure to my life. I mean, really, since the middle of March, I've been home and I've had a lot of family time, and we had a baby a few weeks ago, and it's been great personally to spend all this time with my family, and I'm looking forward to spending all this time with my family. But like we talked about when I was in Wheeling, I like to work. I like to prepare for games. If you don't like the preparation process of broadcasting, then you're not going to be a good broadcaster, and you're not going to enjoy broadcasting, because more of it is preparation than performance. So I enjoy that part, and I'm looking forward to diving in and finding stories and, rearranging my boards from all the off-season moves. And, the schedule is supposed to come out here today as we're taping this. I'm looking forward to that. But at the same time, I know everything's going to be different. I know we're not traveling. We're going to be doing games out of studio. We're going to be doing home games, hopefully, from the arena. But, everything's still kind of up in the air at this point. But I am looking forward to, as hectic as my life is when it's going at full speed, I'm looking forward to having my life hectic and at full speed once again.
Evan, go ahead with your follow-up before.
No, you answered my follow-up in terms of where you guys are going to be broadcasting from. So hopefully the home games, you can get somewhat more of a real feeling calling games at an arena for the first time in almost, let's say 10 months or whatever it is.
Yeah, it was March 11th, I think, and it was the last game I did in Vancouver, or March 10th. So it's been a while.
Yeah, and so now you get that somewhat clarity, but on the road you guys will be in the studio. But that was my follow-up, and thank you, Brendan, for breaking the fourth wall when it comes to taping. People, even though it's we put this out way after the fact, but when the season does start up, I know we saw a couple of rule changes and all that, in terms of the offside, but there's going to be a lot of safety protocols, already put in place in terms of what the NHL will be doing. What's your take on what the NHL, I'm sure from the great job they did in the bubble. They were superb in what they did there, but now they have a little more challenge as teams are traveling all the time. They're not all together. What do you see the possible things that can come out of this?
Yeah, I think that, ultimately what it comes down to is personal responsibility for the players and for the staff and for everybody else. If everybody follows every rule exactly, they won't have any problems. The odds of that happening are slim, right? There are going to be problems. And the problem is with this virus is that if one person does something wrong, it can affect a very large amount of people. And so the thing for me that I take hope in is that when they came back for the bubble, my fear was getting them into training camp. It was taking all of these players from all over the world and getting them into the bubble. Once they were in, you knew they would be fine, but you have to get them in. And the amazing thing is they got them in with relatively small number of positive cases and no real spread through the teams. And that comes down to personal responsibility. That means those guys were doing what they were supposed to do at home on their own, on the honor system, before they came in and joined the team. And that was a big step. And for me, that's what gives me hope about what's going to happen in this season, is that when they were given that opportunity to prove that they could do it on their own, they did it. And so I think there is such a strong team connection with hockey in general. And speaking from the Islanders have a very tight-knit group. You don't want to be that guy, right? Like, you don't want to be the guy that brings it in to the rest of the team. You don't want to be the reason why half your roster is out for 2 weeks. And I think that is a very real sentiment for the players, of making sure that they're not that guy and they don't want to be that guy. So I think that everybody has the rules. Everybody has some common sense and some knowledge about how to make this good. The one problem is, not to bring up the problems, but now you need your wife to do it, and your kids to do it, and your girlfriend to do it, and your parents to do it, and whoever else you bring into your life, they've got to be 100% in it too, or you need to cut them out 100% and make sure that they don't jeopardize what you've got. So I'm hopeful that once they get into that group environment and they're so focused on the games, and with the compressed schedule, there's not going to be a lot of time for things other than hockey. I think they can pull it off, but again, that's just a hope at this point.
How much pride do you feel having and working in a league where the NHL did it right with the bubble? It was a pretty seamless transition. And I'm from North Jersey. Evan's from Long Island. You're on Long Island right now too. The pride that you feel being from the Northeast, from the New York area, with an organization that cares about the personal responsibility and executes it right way in conjunction with the geographic area that you're in.
Yeah. I mean, I think that, it was a strange thing being here in March and April when things were going so bad, and it was here. And most of the rest of the country were spectators at this point. It was like, I remember in late February and March about watching videos from Italy and going, oh my God, I can't imagine it being that bad. And then fast forward a month later and we're having the exact same situation. And I think a lot of the rest of the country at that point was thinking the same thing. Like, thank God it's not here in my town or in my state. But it was here from day one when COVID was in the US, it was right in our neighborhood. And so it was a very strange time, but to see, the resilience of the people, and my wife's a nurse. And so it's very personal here. But the organization, I think, realized very early on, and the teams around here realized early on what an extraordinary effort that the medical professionals and the first responders, were putting forth and are still doing. And I know just this week, John Ledecky, the owner of the Islanders, went and was giving out Islanders jerseys that had Hero on the back to a bunch of medical professionals. And I can't wait for whatever day it is where we have a full arena again, and it might be opening day in Belmont. But you can bet that there's going to be some sort of celebration of the people that got us to this point, specifically in this area.
Well, Brendan, we know you have your hands full at home with the newborn and the other two kids other than the newborn. So we're going to let you go. Thanks for hopping on, man. We appreciate your time, taking some time out of your busy dad day, and go tell Blue Line Deli to give you your own sandwich. I think it's time.
It's good. It's a better story this way. That's all good. But guys, I appreciate it. Look, I've got this is Peoria, by the way. This is hanging above my desk here. It's actually, funny enough, it's a picture taken from the ECHL era in Peoria. We didn't really fill the building like that in the AHL era. So this was when they folded the team. I stole this off the wall because things were going to go in a storage bin in St. Louis somewhere. And I'm like, no, this is coming with me. So I took that with me. And as I'm just looking over my shoulder here, this magnet, 2008 ECHL All-Star game in Stockton, California. So I'm a little bit removed from the ECHL, but it's still here, very present for me.
Do you still have the award, the ECHL All-Star or ECHL Broadcaster of the Year award?
I do. It's a glass puck, which is really cool. And I haven't taken it out of the bubble wrap since we moved here yet. So I do have it, though. This is the AHL award right here. This is the James Ellery Award from the AHL broadcaster stuff. It hangs on the wall. The glass puck is an awesome thing, but I've got 3 kids, as you mentioned. So having it on my desk is
it's a hazard.
Yeah, that's where we're at.
Brendan, appreciate it. Best of luck. Enjoy the season when it starts up very soon. Maybe we'll have you on here again to talk about the NHL as it progresses. But stay safe. Enjoy the new year, and thanks again.
All right. Thanks, guys, for having me.